you very much. And that was Andrea Bracken, everybody, who is our fearless technical leader today and also is the Chief Knowledge Officer for Advocates for Human Potential. I'm Kate Pugh, and I am joining you actually from Orono, Maine today. And I am faculty at the Information and Knowledge Strategy Master of Science program at Columbia University. And I am thrilled today to introduce you to Chris McNulty, who is joining us and talk about Fearless at 6 o'clock his time in the morning from Washington State. He is with Microsoft and he is the product manager for the Office 365 suite. And Christopher will tell us maybe a little bit more about your experience, but I am particularly thrilled to have you here. We worked together at KMA. I really loved working with you, and I'm really pleased that you're joining us today. I will say one word of additional word of introduction around this is that the community that you are surrounded with today are all friendlies. We have experience in knowledge, and we're unbelievably interested in Cortex, and we're unbelievably interested in making it a success. And we're really looking forward to talking with you. Do you want us to ask questions as you go, Chris, or would you prefer that we ask afterwards?
Sure thing, absolutely. We're among friends. So I do have some things I'm going to kind of share to ground the discussion, to kind of give an overview of where we've been with knowledge with Cortex, where we're headed. Would love to get people's thoughts as we go. And as I am fond of saying when I speak to audiences, particularly here on the West Coast, is that, I am from a large Irish family from the East Coast, and being interrupted doesn't throw me off my game. It makes me feel like I'm surrounded by family. And so I welcome that. I just ask if someone, if you're doing something in chat, I don't seem to be picking up on it. It's mostly because, as you can see from my screen, I'm not going to be watching the chat directly during the presentation. So if someone could flag me on that, that would be awesome. Let me just try to keep this running off to the side on my phone, so I at least have a fighting chance of seeing the chat as someone has any questions. Terrific. So my name is Chris McNulty. I am Director of Product Marketing for Microsoft 365 here in the Seattle area. As some of you know, I've spent probably most of my professional career in and around Boston, so it's great to be talking to my hometown crowd. And the answer to the question, how long does it take in Seattle before you stop rooting for the Red Sox and the Patriots, is never. I just want to be clear about that. But I've spent a number of years working, coming up through some major companies in the Boston area, through Knowledge Management Associates in the consulting realm, and spent several years with Quest/Dell Software before joining Microsoft 5 years ago to spearhead things that we're doing with content management and business process. So today I want to spend a little bit of time talking about knowledge across Microsoft 365, why it matters, give you some overview about Project Cortex. I actually want to do a couple of live code demos with some things we just have. We are still in pre-release, but there's some stuff that we have been setting up in pre-release that just came live in the last few days that I'd love to share with this audience, and then really opening up for discussions, and say really expect a lively narrative to be going on throughout the day. So Cortex is the latest and newest and probably biggest product launch we have done for Microsoft 365 since the rollout of Teams several years ago. Microsoft 365 we described as being the world's productivity cloud, and it's really hard to focus on all the single products that make up M365, but it's really, I think, important to look at our commitments. And if you look at the things that we have brought forward historically in areas like security and in workflow and collaboration, you see us taking advantage of what does it mean to bring everything into a common platform. It lets us do things like create teams, which is a fusion of content and communication. And over the past couple of years, starting about 3 years ago, what really began as a journey to reinvigorate content services, ECM in the cloud, through talking to customers, Microsoft has really become committed to the idea that knowledge is a central piece of our strategic vision for the months and years to come. So I know that we've been talking at Microsoft, at least for a couple of years, about how much the world has been changing in an era of digital transformation. And I think it is interesting to kind of reflect on what our CEO, Satya Nadella, said yesterday on the announcement around our quarterly earnings, is that we are seeing 2 years of digital transformation delivered in the course of 2 weeks. And COVID-19 is obviously reshaping our economies, the way people are at home, the way work is getting done. I have to note at the outset that Microsoft is really committed to 3 principal goals over the coming weeks and months. The first is making sure that we're doing everything we can to empower remote work. The second, making sure that we're being thoughtful about providing tools that allow organizations to come together and restart operations. And third is, in restarting operations, how do we help organizations achieve a level of transformation that helps them hopefully emerge from this crisis more resilient, more efficient, and more primed for success in the months and years to come. What's interesting in talking over the past 2 months, I've been speaking about Cortex and knowledge and working with our customers and in our preview programs for years. Just over the past 2 months, as we've been assessing the ways that the world has changed and how Microsoft can best help, we have been honestly cautious about how much do we want to celebrate a new product during uncertain times. And what we've heard from customers is not just that they see knowledge as being a key asset to drive efficiencies and to help reinvent their business. They're wishing we could get this product out sooner because they're finding just being able to easily get to the collected knowledge of an organization is essential in times of remote work, especially for organizations that had to move to that on relatively short order without a lot of preparation. In that discussion with our customers, we really have focused on this as being the core mission statement for knowledge across Microsoft 365. Understanding that the world is always changing and talent and knowledge are scarce assets. Being able to tap into that knowledge and insight really helps people to take the right action and help organizations respond and be more resilient and transform themselves with greater efficiency. One of the proof points that we have around this is looking at some of the efficiencies that we have already started measuring across our customer base around the use of knowledge just in one particular scenario. Being able to, when you think about how people join new companies, there used to be back in the day a place where you would go off-site to a formal training program with lots of binders. And after 2 or 4 weeks, you would be trained and ready to go do your job. And that isn't the way we introduce people into organizations for the most part anymore. An awful lot of training is, quote, on the job, where you may have a couple of introductory sessions about benefits, and then you're asked to do job shadowing and come to meetings and ask a lot of questions. And it may take 3 to 6 months before you're up to speed at the same pace and the same productivity level as the rest of your colleagues. Nearly $9 million could be saved at a typical U.S. company by improving the time to effectiveness for new hires by just 1 week. We know that what we're doing with knowledge can definitely help streamline how you bring someone into an environment where there are already pre-established products and projects and acronyms and terminology that in the flow of work can be really unfamiliar to people. One company that's been with us on this journey is McNulty. There is a Right now, we have 75 organizations piloting Cortex around the world. We started with a core group of about 15 about a year ago. Mott McDonald is a global engineering firm. They have 16,000 engineers who are billable, and keeping them effective and billable is essential towards their goal of doubling their book of business over the next 5 years. Mott McDonald commits in their corporate mission statement to what they call connected thinking, connecting knowledge to people and people to knowledge. They organize the company around 47 knowledge communities. And those communities can be things, for example, like bridges or water or power or electrical. And any of those projects is tied to one of those. The mission of each of those communities is to collect and capture the best knowledge from the people working on those projects, from their researchers, from academia, and to make sure that as an individual, if I am moving from project to project, I can rapidly get up to speed and tap into the insight that's gone before me, as well as making sure that as I move to my next project, my contributed knowledge has been captured so that I can focus on getting up to speed quickly on my new project, and my knowledge is left behind on my last project for my successors. The average engineer at Mott Mac touches 25 projects in the course of a year, so that velocity is really important to how Mott Mac does that. And we've shared some of this along with a video. For time, I'm not going to play the video, but if you come to our website, which I have links to later on, you can hear from Mott Mac and how they are using Project Cortex to establish these communities as the fabric of knowledge throughout their organization. So when we think about kind of the responsibilities, I think, that Microsoft has in this space, why it's important, I think, for us to help our customers do more with this. We recognize that we have the tools that power most of the experiences that people are using every day. When we think about the history of what has been called in the past knowledge management, we began this journey understanding that there were definitely places in ECM where we thought we could add new value around capture and classification. And that's absolutely true. But we've heard over and over again from our the customers that we researched that many of the opportunities for knowledge management 20 plus years ago were never fully addressed. We've heard about the importance of improving search, improving capture of knowledge, and the shareability of it. And when I think about the way many of those applications were structured, they were limited. First and foremost, the cloud really didn't exist. So the power, the capacity, AI tools weren't there. As a result, many of the experiences of knowledge management were disintegrated. They would require you at the end of a phone call to turn to a knowledge base or a wiki to enter or look up some information. And by being disruptive, they were definitely a little bit disadvantaged at delivering on those needs. But what we've found is that the needs are absolutely still there. So at Microsoft, we have those application experiences, whether you're in Outlook or Teams or Word. We already have a lot of the glass space that people are looking at on mobile devices, laptops, and traditional computers. And there's also tremendous volume and density of information that we see across our cloud with the petabytes of information that's being added to on a daily basis around the world. What brings all of this together for us is Microsoft Graph. The Graph is a set of APIs that developers use, that we use inside our applications, so that any information that we are working on through M365 is indexed, and we establish the relationships amongst them. So Graph is not just a set of APIs, but it also powers things like Microsoft Search, as you'll see in a little bit, to make sure that we're mapping the relationship between people and content and work practices and meetings and communication and the rest to bring all of that together. And that really allows us to use the Graph now to be able to deliver both knowledge about the information and the people connections that are important to that, as well as insights about work practices. And we're going to obviously spend most of our time looking at knowledge. I won't spend a long time on this slide, but this is kind of, for us, the menu of places where we think that knowledge and insights across Microsoft 365 are really important at being able to measure an organization and understand where they are with culture and with change, making sure that we are driving capabilities to connect people to information and insight. And most importantly for today, how do we bring together knowledge and expertise in a way that is impactful for people through the applications that are part of their everyday work? And so that is for us the core of Project Cortex, which is the knowledge network for Microsoft 365. And it really begins kind of, I'm going to read this sort of right to left. If you think about the challenges of the cloud, Cortex is organized around these three capabilities. First and foremost, understanding as at a foundation that the demands that organizations have for content are higher than ever before. How do we use the cloud to create ever expanding repositories so I can bring in transactionally scaled workloads, being able to support millions, if not billions of pieces of content? In addition to that, how can I take advantage of my search connector technology to be able to extend that information? So if I have information that lives in another repository, if it's an on-premises place like a file share, SQL Server, Box, Wiki, Google, Dropbox, Documentum, what have you, how do I index that information to make it start to show up in the graph so I can do more with it? The second part of the journey is understanding that if you're going to bring a billion new items into scope, you're not going to have time to read or process all of those. How can we bring the best of AI forward through Project Cortex in a manner that makes it usable for everyday people to be able to look at content as it comes in, to recognize what kind of content is it, and how do I capture the metadata, the key facts, figures, people, locations, summaries, and details to add as rich tags to that document to be able to drive search, to be able to drive process, as well as compliance. And lastly, how do I then use AI to reason over all of that new insight to be able to combine that information into topics, the building block of how we see that knowledge network being formed to connect people to topics and to each other through the flow of everyday work. For us, that really begins with the knowledge experience, which is what I want to spend the bulk of our time talking about today. Those knowledge experiences are really, as I just said, being able to use AI to find topics through the content that people already have that they're generating through the course of their everyday work, to be able to integrate them into topics that experts can also contribute and curate to be able to then deliver that through the applications that are part of everyday life. So I'm going to just stop here for a second, see if there's any questions on this so far before we before I start showing off some of the capabilities of the product.
Chris, we have
So this is,
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've
Yep.
this is Kate, and that's Andrea Bracken, who's also facilitating. I have 4 questions, but I'm going to flow some of them because I think some are going to, I've talked to you before, so I know some of the things you're going to say. But I do have one question that came up. You were talking just now about being able to surface knowledge, intuit knowledge in the flow. And we had 2 kinds of requests or questions around that, which is, what about knowledge that lives perhaps outside of M365? And what about knowledge that might live in an Exchange folder? So remember, we talked about the example, maybe Mott McDonald had some statements of work. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's working today and maybe how it's looking in the roadmap?
Sure. So I'm going to start the answer. I want to show some things first because I think having a visual vocabulary of how Cortex works will help me deliver that answer with a little bit more detail. But Cortex is reasoning over all the information that lives in Microsoft 365 today. We'll be getting to general availability of the product over the next few months by early summer. It is a fast follow feature. We talked before about being able to reach out and to index other information into the graph. So it is a fast follow for us to be able to take information that if you have living in, a legacy repository like Documentum or Confluence, being able to index that into the graph and then have it flow forward into the knowledge networking that we have that's central to it. So that's not going to be there at day 1 of the product. That's more of a day 2 feature, but the information doesn't necessarily need to be resident inside of M365. So if you have information that lives, say, in a file share in an on-premises environment, or if it is that will come. Cortex at the outset is mining information from shared repositories that live inside SharePoint, which SharePoint acts as the content engine for all of Microsoft 365. Again, we will be later this year bringing capabilities to start bringing content into your knowledge network from the rest of Microsoft 365. So if it's living in Outlook, if it's living in Teams, if it's living, if it's living in Yammer, those are the principal sources that we think within the cloud are going to be the most interesting. And it's funny, Andrea, Kate, and I were talking about this session last week. I would observe, for those of you who are kind of familiar with that range of Microsoft solutions, Teams is very interesting because it's essential. It's becoming the lifeblood of how work gets done. We think certainly during these times. Teams is a very interesting source of knowledge information, and it's a challenging one because people are very brief and very chatty, and contextually, it's hard to get the same level of insight in comments like YT question mark or thumbs up or emojis than it is in Yammer, where people in Yammer tend to have more public, community-oriented conversations, and they tend to communicate in paragraphs rather than text snippets. And so in our research, because we've already started doing the design work on this, Yammer tends to be a far more fruitful place for us to add to collective knowledge than Teams has been so far. Would love to get people's thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very, very helpful comment, because we have had some questions around both searching Teams. We've heard in air quotes searching, but we know that conceptually we're talking about surfacing, not necessarily searching within the land of Cortex. And we've got some interest in possibly enhancing the kind of, if you see, exposure to the insights in Teams by adding things like metadata. These are KMers. They've got good, sophisticated questions.
Yep. I want to get to the demo, but I'm just acknowledging a couple of I'll talk about licensing at the end. Tagging to Microsoft Teams. Very quickly, in case I don't get time to get back to this in depth in the next 35 minutes. So managed metadata has been the taxonomy and classification system throughout SharePoint. What we are doing with Cortex is using this as an example of how can we refresh and modernize managed metadata as a content categorization system, as well as a metadata classification scheme with taxonomy. All of those modern taxonomy experiences are being extended throughout the suite, so that you'll be able to use a common tagging reference for not just SharePoint, but also for Teams and Yammer and any place else. If you're in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, to make sure that there's a consistent set of taxonomic tags that you can apply or have the system automatically apply. Taxonomy is one of the many things that is essential to the knowledge mining that I'm about to show you. So let me just step in and show you a couple of these experiences, which I'm sure will trigger a little bit more of the dialogue. So I begin actually inside Teams. And in this context, I'm adopting the role of Lynn Robbins, who is a new engineer, having a chat with Emily. And Emily has mentioned a couple of things in her discussion with me, Project Core and Mark 8. And I can see that they're highlighted to tell me they're special somehow. And the way that they're special is if I hover over one of them, I will bring, because this is a topic, Project Core is connected to the knowledge network of Cortex. And so I can see the topic card. So this is an experience that is written by AI, and it is based on all of the data that we've been able to index and mine to automatically generate this context card, this topic card, which shows me the acronym, the summary, the key people, the resources that I can go to for more information. And if I tap into the topic card, I'm going to bring up the topic page. You can think of the topic page as essentially being a machine-written wiki page that brings together all the information that we have throughout the organization about core, construction operations reliability. I get the definition. I can see who have been identified as the key experts on this. I can see the resources that those experts have curated onto this page, as well as the resources that have been automatically discovered for me by Cortex to be automatically added to this page. If I go further down, I can see a visualization of what we're calling the knowledge network, that map of topics showing the strength and the nearness and the proximity of that relationship. So as a knowledge manager, I can step in and I can remap this. I can see the system suggesting there's a connection between core and Mark 8. And if I tap into the Mark 8 project, I can see a topic page for Mark 8 where I understand that it's really a set of drone vehicles with sensors to help me measure the success of my construction project. So I can see that there's a relationship there. And I can continue bouncing amongst topics in that fashion. I can also move to a new experience that lives at the top level of M365 called the Knowledge Center. Now, the Knowledge Center brings together a personalized view of all the topics of interest to me, as well as the content and questions that have surfaced from key applications that are important for me to pay attention to. So this is built for me automatically. And again, it's an extensible experience so that you want to integrate other searches, parts, components into these centers, you can do this. Every organization will get at least one knowledge center, and you'll be able to use this as a template to set up more tailored sub-centers, if you will, that will be focused on a specific set of your architecture. For example, if you have a customer service area, you may want people to go to a web portal experience integrated through browsers and through Teams that is just focused on a subset of topics and knowledge and areas and people that is customized for them. So we see a lot of ways that this can carry forward.
Hey, Chris,
Yep.
I just want to, I want to just give people some of the insight that you shared with me earlier.
Yep.
We as KMers often ask questions around parents and children, related terms, synonyms. And one of the things that you expressed earlier when you were showing that graph image was a representation of those related terms, those families. Do you want to talk to us a little bit? I know you've got a geeky KM background, so you can help talk about that from that angle.
Sure thing. So when I'm going through Cortex, and we're seeing here that these things are showing up, we're seeing a topic card coming up in context on an email message. The AI that we're using under the hood, it does an okay job of you applying textual analytics to reason over all the content that you feed to it to say, here's where I think the topics are. And there's some management experiences that a knowledge manager can go see what the AI finds to say, yes, this is a topic. No, this isn't a topic. What the visibility and control should be. One of the most important things to do, though, is to seed it and to steer it. Because although the AI does a reasonably good job of finding things, it works really well if you tell it, here is the managed metadata service, the set of MMS taxonomy that defines an initial set of projects, say, that exist in my organization. Because with that, then Cortex says, okay, here's the list of 20 terms and synonyms that I know about that I should be looking for across these million documents. And Cortex will then come back and say, well, of those 20 things, I found 18, but I also found 7 other things that look related that you may want to take a look at. So there's definitely a heuristic, there's definitely a dialogue that happens between the system and the experts and how that comes up. The other part of that is that we're not just mapping content to topics into itself, but it's also important how we recognize that people are seen as experts. So if I look at Nestor's profile card here, which represents him, I can see that he's been tagged as an expert for construction operations reliability as well as Mark 8, because we are looking at the patterns of how people are working with content to make suggestions about what topics are going to be not just be most relevant to a person, but where they're likely to be an expert. And there's a range of controls and definitely a range of opinions about, and we've heard this across our customers. Some say, nope, I don't want the system doing anything. I have a managed hierarchy of skills, and I will determine it separately, and I want my HR skills database to be authoritative for the people in my company. Great.
Hey,
Other
Chris,
people, yep.
Oh, yes. Sorry, you finished that sentence, and I'm going to ask you something about people.
Great. So, I mean, we've also heard from customers that say, I don't have a managed taxonomy. I want the system to suggest things, but I want people to be empowered to say that they're an expert in it. I don't want the system making that determination. We hear that. And we also hear from organizations that say, I don't have the time to even have people transacting that. Let the system figure it out. I trust the AI, and I'm going to let it figure out the expertise. And we've heard all three of those ranges, and we expect to hear even more once we get the product out there. Kate, you had a question.
Yeah, so you answered a lot of the questions that are coming across the transept. People are very interested in what their role as a, if you will, a taxonomist would be in Cortex. And you've sort of just started to tell us the answer to that. They've also asked both about privacy and about security trimming from the perspective of just personalization. Will people see the same cards? Will they see, as you showed before, the highlighted project core if perhaps they are not part of the club that gets to see project core? Can you tell us a little bit about how it's being personalized with respect to presenting content?
Sure. I wish we had half a day. I could kind of walk through the way that all gets set up. But there's first and foremost, this is built on top of Microsoft Graph. So that means we're fully respecting all of the security that is intrinsic on the content that we're using to create topics from. So that actually leads to kind of the default security model for a topic, because if we're creating a topic off of a piece of content that only 5 people can see, then only those 5 people should see the topic. In addition, even if I create a wide open topic, if it is linked to content that is private, the people who can't see that content don't get another way to it. So we're not opening up any additional security, but you can restrict access to topics even more tightly than what you can do with the content itself. So there is that level of control. You also have control about, especially this for adoption, for how this gets rolled out. So you can determine that Cortex is only going to look for knowledge in a certain subset of your architecture to a certain subset of your taxonomies. And you may say, I only want these 300 people in my organization to even see this topic system. The rest of the people wouldn't see the highlights that you're seeing inside Teams right now if they weren't not just licensed, but even if they're licensed, you have to approve whether people administratively are allowed to see the topic system or not. I'm going to just skip a little bit forward and talk a little bit about, here I'm showing that since, in many ways, if Cortex were a motion picture, we would say, from the producers of SharePoint. And so since a lot of the Cortex team comes from the SharePoint engineering organization, of course, we'll be bringing Cortex out into SharePoint experiences like you see here. I am going to skip around in what I was going to present. I'll skip forward on a little bit of the graph, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of Microsoft Search. So Microsoft Search is a unified search engine that sits across all of the M365 capabilities. We've been doing work since we announced it. Microsoft Search essentially is saying, let's create a common index of all of the content that lives in the cloud so that we can have not just, common search experiences and a common index, so that regardless of whether I'm starting my search inside SharePoint or if I'm inside Outlook or inside Teams, I can get to the same information. But I'm also using Graph through Microsoft Search to be able to personalize those results. Search is also being extended with our content connectors. So there are right now 7 content connectors that Microsoft ships and over 100 that our partners are shipping. We'll be announcing even more Microsoft first-party connectors coming up next month at the Microsoft Build conference. Odds are pretty good that we have, given the range of systems you can plug in, we can already index that information in. And I want to spend a little bit of time walking you through some of those knowledge experiences through Microsoft Search, and also talk through a little bit of curation. So I am going to ask for a little bit of forbearance since I'm now going to do this on live code that runs inside Microsoft. So here, if this is actually Microsoft's live running intranet, a piece of our intranet. So if I come here and do a search for the word Cortex, you'll see I get some suggestions along the way that are being supplied by search. And if I apply the search, you'll see the first thing that comes up is a topic card. Since we see that the term somehow is recognized as being mapped to a topic, the first thing I get is the topic card. So if I click into Cortex, you'll see it is going to bring up an automatic page for me that's been defined here. Let me show you, and this is with acknowledgement that I'm showing you pre-release code, how that page actually works and is defined. So here I can see, obviously, we won't ship it with overview looking like it's written in lots of accented characters. But the topic page for Cortex brings together for me summary information that's been curated, that's been structured on this page, key people, experts, resources, and the like. And if I come in here to edit it, I can see, for instance, I am adding, I can add additional names such as Microsoft Knowledge. And since I am recognized as an expert, when I republish my edits to this page, they will automatically flow into the topics that are out there. I can take a look at people who are identified as experts. And since I am an expert and also an administrator over the system, I can add or remove additional people. So these folks are all particularly strong. If I wanted to add my colleague Rebecca as an expert on this page, I can. And then republish the topic that's out there.
So, Chris, this was not the exact question that was asked, but it's part of sort of a universe of questions. How much personalization can the individual do? So I think you just named somebody, Rebecca. Will she get an alert and can she say, actually, I'm going on sabbatical, please don't put me in there? And similarly, on the consumer side, can they subscribe to things so that they, dominate their view? What are some of the personalizations that can be taking place outside of, if you will, this admin role you're playing?
So it's an excellent question. So there's definitely, we see knowledge as really being a team sport. At the core, there definitely is a role for knowledge managers who are not just administering the subsystems for taxonomy and for search, and for knowledge mining and classification. But from an individual basis, I can, and again, I can't demo all of this because we're still building it, getting ready for a summer release. But I can choose to both follow a topic as well as one of the things that I skipped through is what we will be shipping looks a little bit like this. So if I'm looking at Nestor's profile here, as we saw before, Nestor is an expert in these two topics. The default behavior for how that works is if I'm looking at my own profile, again, I'm logged in here as Lynn, you'll see that rather than forcing topics into my profile, when someone proposes me as an expert, or if the system suggests me as an expert, I have to accept that here. So it is up to me to choose which topics I am seen as an expert. I also, at release, I will have their support for saying, these are topics that are of interest to me. I'm not an expert, but I want to follow them. Providing that signal into the graph is a real important way that we personalize the results to make sure that those topics are scored more highly, essentially come up above the fold in searches and in experiences, and to make sure that I'm suggesting the right topics and content for people through the course of work. The other thing I wanted to show, let me just jump over. If I come down here, one of the things that we're putting, you can see, as we mentioned before, these are curated resources people have added. These are automatically discovered resources. I can go to some related sites. And I know this is a little recursive. If you're familiar with the movie from about 20 years ago, when I'm using Project Cortex to show you information about Project Cortex, it's sort of like John Malkovich and being John Malkovich, jumping into John Malkovich's mind and entering a world where everyone is saying Malkovich, Malkovich, Malkovich. So there's a little bit of recursion going on here. Just want to see. So I can see, for instance, in live running code, when I see the topic card for Cortex, I can see that there's a little bit of disintermediation going on here. Based on, and I'm trying to see if I can find something that'll pop. The very bottom of the topic card is reserved to if in context we want to ask the user a question. In this case, I'm in user context for this. The questions that can show up here, and again, we're in pre-release code, so I'm having a difficult time forcing it to pop, can be, is this relevant in this context? Or some of the information on this card, is Rebecca Isaacson an expert in this? Does this file make sense in this context? I will try one other place I might be able to pop this up. Just look at another page, see if I can find. No. So the signals that the user gives back are: do you consider this person an expert? Do you consider this content to be relevant? There seem to be multiple terms here that could be related. Which one of these is most correct? Those are signals that flow back to the experts and to the knowledge managers that they can see interactively in their curation. And even if they don't take action, it does also provide a signal back to the AI. And the general rule about the interoperation between what people are doing to curate and what people are doing to look at signals that are automatically generated is we give precedence to human-centric activity over machine-centric activity. So someone stepping in as an expert in curating a page is a much stronger signal than the things which are inferred through the ordinary course of work.
In that vein, one question that we got, which I know came from our good friend Mike Gilronan, who also was an organizer of this event and should get due credit. He said,
Mike.
Can you select to not be an expert on a specific topic? Can you somehow prevent sort of the request time that may be delaying anything?
I think that's, Mike, I think you're right. I don't know that we're going to have that in the product day one, but I want to make sure that we are thoughtful about that. The experience I showed you before about letting someone opt in is really driven by our experience across the EU. That individual profiles kind of belong to the individual, and it's a little bit creepy to say that in effect Skynet has determined you are an expert in this and you have no choice in this matter. And I think that what you're saying is sort of the next extension that we should be factoring into our design, which is, not just, I'm opting out. Like, I can't take any more questions about Microsoft Zunes. I don't know why you think I'm an expert on it. Everyone who's got a broken one of these devices, they haven't made them in 10 years. Now they're coming to me. Please take me out of this discussion. I think that's important for us to be able to empower people to do that. So it's not in the product yet, but I definitely will give that some consideration to see how we can incorporate that into our designs.
Similarly, in the expert questions, and probably you were just about to say this, we have questions both about the emerging experts and also the expert collection. So let's say, let's start with the emerging experts. We all remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, this concept of this application called Tacit, which would smell your email and say, present to you, are you an expert? And you'd be like, what? Expert?
Yeah.
Well, I only play one on TV. Is there a way in which somebody could be alerted to the leadership, hey, this is somebody who could be genius in coming?
So that's not a capability that we've built into the product for day one, that you would see it automatically. We can infer that based on the signals inside Microsoft Graph. So I would say, I think it is the analytics that we're building. I think that's definitely an important signal for us to look at. If we hear enough customer demand for, I want to see who are the experts on the rise administratively. That's definitely something that we would want to flag. We also at Microsoft, we also have to be, I think, thoughtful about the best use of AI. And I do recognize there's a little bit of a slippery slope in that. Because if you're asking, who's sharpening their edge, it also starts to create the tools to say, well, who's slipping? And, there's definitely an upside and a downside to that. So we have to be careful about doing things which we think kind of penetrate the zone of individual privacy that we think that's important to be maintained regardless of where you are in the world.
And GDPR and other elements like that probably need to be consumed in the implementation. We all know too. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a related product that Microsoft ships called Workplace Analytics, and if you've ever used the My Analytics engine, which is widely distributed, which gives you emails and some pointers to say, last week you spent, you spent only 4 hours a week in focus time. You may want to stop taking so many meetings after hours. You're multitasking during all your meetings. All of those signals that we get from the graph that we bundle and we provide personally to people. And you can choose to opt in or opt out of those. Workplace Analytics takes all of those signals and it allows an organization to look at general trends, usually overlaid with other data, to be able to ask questions like, what are the work characteristics of the top 20% of my sales force? And this was a specific question that Workplace Analytics answered for EY. And they found that the top 20% of their sales performers spent 12 hours a week in customer-based communications. Everyone else averaged 8.5. And correlation is not the same thing as causation, but it's a very interesting signal to say just 3.5 hours of customer communication separates the top sales performance from everyone else. But that data gets anonymized through WPA. And there's a lot of detailing in WPA to make sure that someone can't ask a question like, I want to find out what are the work characteristics of someone who sits on the second floor of building 3 and is the director of product marketing for Project Cortex, because then someone is looking at me. So there are lots of boundaries that we put in Workplace Analytics to make sure that's the case. And we want to be very thoughtful about this expert signals, which could be analyzed through WPA as well, making sure that we're doing it in a manner that adds value and doesn't degrade individual incentives.
I've got a content question here.
Yep.
There are 2 different types of content that our audiences are interested in. One is, when might there be a search of the World Wide Web as part of the discovery? And also, what about audio and visual content? So this meeting could be automatically transcribed in stream. And then it could also be discovered to the extent that we might earmark it as discoverable. Have you got some thoughts on these?
Yeah, great topic. I think that integrating web-based search is something we could do a very interesting design session on it. Cortex, in theory, you could use to generate an index of the web intrinsic to Cortex. I think that would get you, if you told it to start at the root of google.com and index all the content that you found out there from it. Although Cortex is technically capable of doing that, you would move through some of the indexing thresholds and start to have to generate some significant cost. There's probably not a key value in doing that. The way that we'd want to approach that is through being able to thoughtfully integrate an engine like, either Google results or more likely Bing, to be able to contextually run that external search. Like, just to quickly illustrate that, to show you again, if I come to live code, and since I'm using we use Microsoft Search internally, and if I do a search for Project Cortex, what I get is a federated set of search results. So you'll see I get at the top of the list, these are things that come internally from Microsoft. We never merge the indexes. No one else who isn't from Microsoft will ever see this content, this information, combined with the rest of this page, which is information that is coming from across the public web. So that's definitely one thing. I want to talk a little bit about taxonomy and how we see that driving forward with classification. So we have a bunch of AI that also can reason over content. And this is sort of a predecessor to the AI that, or a precursor rather, to the AI that we're using to create topics. So one level down, we're taking a look and we're making sure that we're extracting metadata. And that core metadata foundation, those taxonomy services, as I mentioned before, making sure that we are supplying the same services across 365, using terms to drive search, to drive suggestion, making sure that we have great ways to enforce content typing and the rest throughout the suite. I wanted to just briefly, speak about, what I've in years past have described as the cost of the red asterisk about making something mandatory. So the ways that you can get metadata onto content, there's a couple of different ways. You can, as always, as ever has been the case, you can ask someone or require that someone read content and type in a summary of it. And that definitely has applicability, especially for the newest bit of content. But as we know, 90 to 99% of the time, that never happens. So we have three sets of capabilities that come with Cortex around being able to look at unstructured document, to be able to see, this looks like a contract, this looks like a spreadsheet, this looks like a resume, and pull out facts from that. We also do it for forms. We're also supplying technology to do it from objects. So if I have videos, we're automatically transcribing the videos. If I have images, we can recognize objects, OCR, handwriting inside all of those to pull those out into the index to make them searchable. So I wanted to at least speak to those elements. The thing I wanted to just also illustrate here is how that comes together. Let me get to one of the other new experiences in Cortex is the content center. So here I'm looking at a content center, and I can go in and we're starting to supply some key analytics about, this is a top line, I'm not going to have time to click through it, but to say, here are the classifications that are going on, so you can look at the rising trends, the falling trends in taxonomy, in terms, and in classifications, so you can see something that seems to be of interest. If all of a sudden we're seeing too big to fail, as I saw that as a comment out there,
yeah.
Is suddenly being automatically suggested for lots of content out there. That's not just something that we see as a signal, but we are building into the reporting that will ship inside Cortex. I just want to, while I'm talking about this, I'm going to go into a document library, and I am going to perform the radical operation of uploading a bunch of content into this. So let me just upload a bunch of these PDF files. So you're seeing these are being analyzed. Columns will be appended with discovered values, and one item wasn't updated. Just to give you a peek of what one of these files looks like, you can see these are trade confirmations, right? So if I drill into it, you can see I've got a date, so much, here's a reference, this many shares, so on and so forth. Here's the amount, here's the execution, a fairly mundane transactional statement. Let me close this out, show you what's happening behind the scenes.
And while you're doing this, I want to just underscore, you answered a question that came a couple of times in the text, which was,
Yep.
is this one and done, or do the expertise ebb and flow? And you just said topics ebb and flow, but similarly, you could demote somebody or move them to another topic.
On the topic side, just while I'm waiting for this to finish, actually, it's already finished processing. But
Okay.
We don't want to, at the outset, make a lot of assumptions about the most meaningful workflows that we can trigger, the alerts and so forth. We're trying to calibrate the right frequency by which I can, as a curator, how do we alert you to say, also, you're an expert on this topic, and we just saw 400 documents come into scope last night. You may want to take a look at our suggested changes to the page to see if you would agree with those. Or you're an expert in this topic, and it's been 6 months and nothing has changed. Are we still there? Is this relevant? Do we need to step in? Do we need to downgrade that? So there is how much can we do through AI, but most importantly, how do we use AI to activate someone to go in and be empowered to take a look at those trends and all of those signals that are coming back from not just people are saying this is relevant, or I like this topic, I don't like this topic. Yes, that influences the AI, but it's also available, made available to anyone who's an expert, who's a knowledge manager to see this. Basically, what I did here is I went in, and as these were updated, you can see that it automatically pulled out all of the metadata on this. So if I'm looking at this document, it's nicely formatted, but let's see. Come on, system, catch up.
And I want to acknowledge that we've gotten to the top of our hour. I'm not kicking you out, Chris, but I want to let people know that we are continuing the conversation until you're finished. And we will post it on the SIKM Boston site, the Teams Thursday New England site, the SharePoint Saturday, and also the global SIKM site. So
you can see, without my opening this document up or typing it out, all of that information, the QSIP, the ticker, the customer, the amounts, settlement figures, all of that was pulled out and added as tags for me. So I can use that to consume in, that makes it searchable. It makes it, if the terms in here are mapped to topics, and the mapping between tags and topics is a really important part of the connection that's happening here. These, if I had the right permission, if say Dell was a managed topic, could potentially be in scope for me to get to those topic cards. You can see I've also triggered a workflow. So I can see that these two statements have been flagged for me, that someone needs to go in. They weren't automatically approved because the system is seeing, it's using a workflow to say, this is a trade for $4,100, but they only settled $3,500. So there's variance in it, and someone needs to step in to take a look at that. All of that is happening. This is another aspect of curation about, we want to be thoughtful about the interaction between AI and between people. And so this is all happening as not just as a set of extensions to Graph, but also to the content type engine, which has been which we took over from SharePoint. So I'm looking at this model. This is really a content type. So I need to be able to go in and instruct the system. How do you make sure that you recognize something as a trade confirm or not? So I can go through and teach the system how to recognize that. I upload some sample documents, say this looks like a confirm. Here's one I haven't labeled. This looks like a confirm. And it's also important to include negative examples. So this is not a trade confirm. And in teaching the system how to recognize whether something is a confirm or not, once I've supplied sufficient examples, I can train the model, and then I can test it. The other thing that I can do that's really important is stepping in to give instructions about how are you going to pull out, for instance, the ticker. And so the way that I walk through that is I'll say, here's how to go find the ticker. I need to go through and give some examples that say, let's train. and let's say should be something that's labeled here. And I'm going to say, there's the QSIP. Sorry, that's QSIP is not the ticker. Helps to pick the right thing. Next file. And I can go through and, oh, it found something here that isn't the ticker. Let's turn that off. And on this one, I come in and say, here's the stock information. So I can put the patterns in. And Cortex can do a reasonably good job about reasoning over those. Then there's a matter of training the system where I can walk through, and with the sample files I upload, it's going to show me, in blue is what I highlighted, in green is what the system highlighted. And I can improve the accuracy. It can look at general text analytics by providing explanations or hints. And if I want to add a new explanation, suffix elements.
Or generally either 3 or 4
right.
characters. Yeah.
Right. So I can supply specific phrases. I can supply things to look for that are near it, or patterns to look for inside of that. And I think, we can say inside of a pattern, do I, am I case sensitive? If I'm just looking for 4 numbers, if that was that's, by the way, not a pattern, so I don't want to save that. But the more of these I supply, the more likely it is that that the AI is going to do exactly what I want it to do. So we're finding these and we're providing those hints. And that interaction between someone who is, say, a process curator and AI can be used to improve the accuracy of this model. You see right now, the system is predicting on test information, we're going to be 100% accurate. 100%. That's fairly confident. But that's how we're able to come back here and make sure that in real time, as I'm working on something like a confirm, the way that I got to all of those nicely extracted and formatted information is because I went and uploaded and set those rules up. And once I establish those rules, I can take that model and I can extend it and distribute it to any library in Cortex or any library back in SharePoint. So all of those processing rules will be there to make sure that I'm enriching the content, again, to make it more searchable and make it more relevant in the course of knowledge. I recognize that we are at time, so I wanted to just
we are
jump forward to wrap up a couple of things here. First and foremost, if this is a topic of interest, one thing that Andrea, Kate, and I have talked about, and we're working with Mike on, is making sure that we'd love to continue this dialogue. So if you have some more specific use cases, we would love to establish some sort of focus group where you can come to us with, hey, these are things that you might want to think about, or would be really helpful to me if the product would work this way or that way. That's something that Kate and Andrea suggested. We would love to figure out the right forum for bringing some of those discussions forward. It's really important for us. Cortex will reach general availability by early summer. The website that I've listed here is one. If you go there, you can register to get additional information. Our preview programs, unfortunately, are closed right now since we're getting much close enough to GA. We may not have enough time to do a meaningful preview program. The one that we just started will run for the next 2 months. But we provide lots of information, including we have an office hours series, which is an opportunity for the public to come in and every 2 weeks we have a focused discussion. It's very similar to what we do in the preview program, where we'll talk about onboarding, we'll talk about planning, we'll talk about each of the subsystems of Cortex in technical depth and business depth to help you plan for it, set up and administer your environment. All of those calls are recorded. They're all available through the website that's listed here.
This is fabulous, Chris.
So I know that we're at time. I'm taking a look, see if there's any other, a couple of questions I know about languages and about licensing. So Cortex will be a premium offering. That means that it will be something that you can add to an E3 environment if you're familiar with your license structure. It will also be integrated into the so-called E5 licenses for Office 365. So there's a way to purchase it, and based on what licensing you have, you may already be in line to get this at no additional expense. Cortex will support English language at release. Spanish will be added later this year. Early next year, French, German, and Chinese, and then throughout 2021, we'll be adding the rest of the principal 14 languages that Office 365 supports. So that was a decision. We recognized that if we waited to get all 14 languages that are all 14 core languages that Microsoft generally supports, it might take us another 6 to 12 months. So we wanted to get some value out early by starting with English. We hear lots of feedback about when will you support Ukrainian, when will you support Tagalog, and it's our intent to ultimately be able to support all those languages, but we had to start with English.
Chris, I want to say super thank you. I know you are multitasking and you're reading the chat, but I want you to know that you're getting many, many notes of gratitude in the chat. We will probably put out a call for volunteers to be part of your focus group. I suspect you'll get a lot from this wonderful crowd of KM aficionados. And I want to say thank you, everybody. We've gone over today, but we have a good recording. So if any of your buddies have signed off, we'll make sure that's available. And thank you for coming in and joining us, especially at 6 a.m. your time.
Well, you know, when I agreed to do this, I was expecting to do this live. So it seemed like a better, in normal times, I get back to Boston at least once a month. So hopefully before not too long, we can come back and hopefully do this face to face when it makes sense to do that.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you. It's been
Thank you,
wonderful
Andrea.
to see you
Thank
again.
you, Kate.
Okay,
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.